Okay. I think Ryoko have seen enough of me today, right?
Yeah. So we'll just do a brief introduction. That's all right. Okay, so look at the camera for this. So we're pleased to welcome Professor Stavros Assimakopoulos. My best attempt there. Having completed a PhD in linguistics at the University of Edinburgh and a postdoctoral appointment in philosophy of language and logic at the University of Granada, Stavros is now a resident academic member of the Institute of Linguistics and Language Technology at the University of Malta. He's well known for his work in semantics and pragmatics, and more specifically, relevance theory. His research is very interdisciplinary and seeks to connect ideas coming from the domains of formal linguistics, philosophy, and cognitive psychology, with a view to eventually developing a psychologically realistic account of linguistic meaning and meaning-making practices while taking into account their sociological dimensions. He has a strong interest in critical discourse studies, and he's currently presenting work by conducting data-driven research on discourses of traditional and social media and combining it with theoretical perspectives stemming from philosophy of language and argumentation theory. Currently working on a number of funded projects, and today he's going to lead a session called Relevance Theory in the Domain of Linguistic Pragmatics. So without further ado, we'll pass it over to Stavros.
Thank you so much, Kate. I mean, as I said, even in my abstract, sort of say, this is like in lieu of a presentation. I mean, I inevitably ended up creating a presentation and some slides, but these are thoughts that I've been toying about, and I've written some of them down, but then I want to take this a bit further. I have to give credit where credit is due. Like this was, I was initially thinking of presenting something slightly different, but we had this really lovely viva of a PhD thesis this morning that talked about conceptual content and this sort of thing. And it sort of gave me the impetus to, okay, there needs to be more work done on the horizon. My discussion here is going to be more, I mean, I'm not presenting a ready-made idea. I just have some thoughts and ideas, and what I really expect and hope to come out of this is that I get like really robust criticism that would lead me to think that what I'm saying, you know, is not actually in line with relevance theory. One of the things that I've noticed in the many years that I've studied relevant theories, that it tends to be like, while it's like my favorite framework in all time and everything, it's also quite elusive when it comes to trying to pin down a specific idea or point that it has in relation to other theoretical questions and domains. So let me just start. And okay, it hurts like, okay, so we started with the definition of linguistic pragmatics. And I know that this is not the relevance theoretic definition of linguistic pragmatics, but I think that this is what everyone who has taught pragmatics in any school of thought would take as the most uncontroversial way of looking at pragmatics. And this has to do, like, the pragmatics essentially comprises those linguistic investigations that make necessary reference to aspects of the context. So no matter whether you are a pragmaticist in relevance theory, whether you are, I don't know, a formal semanticist or whatnot, what makes something pragmatic is that you have context playing a role in this. And then in this particular case, and again, this deviates slightly from what relevance theory puts forth as a concept of context. Here, the term context is understood to cover the identities of the participants, the temporal and spatial parameters of the speech event, the beliefs, knowledge, and intention of the participants. This is, I think, the point where relevance theory is more at home with in that speech event, and no doubt much besides that. So one of the criticisms that has been launched against relevance theory for a number of years is that, okay, you're taking this really intentional sort of approach towards communication and what context is and whatnot, but there are other aspects that you don't really account for. And one of the things that I think has started to also show within the relevance theoretic account, and again, I only have a very vague musing in this regard, is that this is actually now increasingly being debated when it comes to non-propositionality. Like, are these effects intentional? Can we really think that, you know, someone wants, you know, to communicate an emotion that is specific or whatever have you? Having given you this, what I think is the overarching notion of pragmatics that we're all working towards or whatnot. I think that the relevance theoretic take is quite specific, and if I mean this has been a point of debate in various discussions with Deirdre, but I think that this is persistent in their writing. So and in this particular passage, she does distinguish between pragmatics as the investigation of language use, which is the overarching, I think, way of looking at pragmatics, and relevance theory is a theory that sees pragmatics as primarily concerned with providing a theory of communication. And within this particular view of pragmatics, pragmatics is thought of as delimited by Grice's notion of non-natural meaning or speaker meaning or whatever you want to call it. And by association, in relevant theory, they're not calling this speaker meaning, and there's a very good grounds, of course, for debating this. They're essentially talking about the intended import of ostensive acts. And I'm sure that you all know this, but okay, an ostensive act is designed to attract and address his attention and focus it on the communicator's intended import. Like, I want to tell you something, and I devise a particular stimulus that will get your attention and just point you towards the direction that I want you, towards the conclusions that I want you to derive out of it. So there is a bit of a tension here, right? On the one hand, like, this doesn't cover all language use. This has nothing specifically to do with language. This is an account of communication, and obviously, relevance theorists we have been at pains to show this over the years. Now, what I want to, and again, as I said, this is a bit of a thought process. It's not so much a fully thrown out idea. What I want to return to is the original question of, okay, I'm a linguist, right? And most of us would be. A question that I have when studying language is, especially as interested in semantics and pragmatics, is how does language signify, both in communicative context and outside of communicative context? I think that an assumption that we're all making, I mean, I think this is very extra simplifying, but we tend to distinguish between a level which we call semantics and which accounts for the meaning that is our knowledge of language, right? So the meaning that we know, so in terms of the lexical knowledge or formal logic and how things are put together. And then pragmatic, which typically accounts for how meaning is transmitted from speakers to hearers. And contextual inference is supposed to lie at the foundation of this transmission. And I think that this is extremely important, not important, at least has been underlined quite a few times in relevant theory, especially when the minimal semantic sort of camp started attacking all contextualist accounts and whatnot. The reaction that they received by Karsten, by Sperber, by Wilson and whatnot is that we're talking about communicated meaning. So it's not encoded meaning that we're positing all these contextual notions on and whatnot. And I think that no matter how much we dilute semantic content in relevance theory, it's still there. There is something. It's a label. It's something, but there is something really small that is stable across all occasions. And what I want to first, and I know that this is going to be highly controversial, is what I want to first try and question or problematize is whether speaker intentions are necessary for information transmission in the same way as contextual inference, like, that you have assumptions and you need to draw some information from it. And I mean, obviously, you understand that I want to go against this to a certain extent. In order to do this, I want to revert back to very early work on relevance theory, which has now been brought back into the attention with regards to the non-propositional effects debate, and also the whole discussion of literary interpretation and whatever have you, which was a distinction that was drawn even before the book between comprehension and interpretation. And just to to get you back on track on what the distinction is and to tell you what the difference here is. By comprehension, originally, I mean, now they have been very explicit about saying that we're now using them interchangeably as though they mean the same thing. But I think that this is an important distinction. So by comprehension, originally, Wilson, Sperber and Wilson called comprehension the process by which the intended meaning is recovered. So basically what is said and what is implicated in a Gricean terminology. Obviously, there are huge deviations with explicatures and whatnot, but the basic thing is that, when you comprehend, you're essentially getting access to what the speaker said and what they implicated and whatever have you. And then they also differentiated between this and the interpretation, which is the recovery not of only of the intended message or cognitive effects or whatever have you, but also of any further information that may not have been specifically intended by the speaker, which the hearer derives from the inference on his own account. So we're talking about things that you can think about without me intending you to think about while I'm telling you, while I'm talking here. And obviously, the whole point here is that interpretation goes beyond comprehension. So, and as they actually suggested when they came up with this distinction, comprehension can only be studied, not just most usefully, but I think that they said that it can only be studied as part of the broader interpretation process, which I think makes a lot of sense. Like, because if you think about it, we live in a world, we see things around us, and everything involves some sort of interpretation and drawing conclusions about things that are not intentional or whatever have. And when it comes to the context, again, we have a distinction. So the context for comprehension includes only those of the hearer's beliefs and assumptions, which the speaker intended the hearer to use during the process. Whereas interpretation, the context for interpretation includes not only those beliefs and assumptions, but also further beliefs, not necessarily shared by the speaker, which the hearer on his own responsibility brings to bear. So, for example, and I recall this is a very anecdotal example, let's say I was at a talk at some point. There was a huge train crash in Greece, and during the talk, it was the next day. So during the talk, the person giving the talk gave an example about trains and whatnot, and immediately they retracted because I'm sorry, I didn't realize that this is a sensitive topic right now. So again, this was not a belief that they intended me to have, but it sort of brought up memories and other non-propositional effects to anyone at the audience who was Greek. Obviously, and I think that this is really important, we can't really isolate the former. So we're talking about the theoretical distinction about assumptions that I, as the speaker, want you to draw from what I'm telling you, and other assumptions that you have on your own. I don't think that you can realistically distinguish between the two, right? I mean, you cannot really isolate what I want you to think. You just think on your own, right? And while thinking about this distinction or whatnot, I was wondering, and I think you already know the answer, but I'll just go through the argument myself. How would that work in psychological terms? And obviously, we have two rules. On the one hand, we can see these processes as one encompassing the other, but in a serial way, which obviously is not the case. But so we can say that comprehension precedes interpretation. And there is a sentence sense, and I know this is really controversial, but again, as I said, we're just chatting, I'm just giving you, like, from reading most of the literature on relevance theory, weak implicatures are supposed to be these like spin-off things that are not part of the basic meaning or whatever have you. In this, anyway, I don't attribute this to relevance theory, but a lot of the writing within the framework suggests that first we understand what the speaker intended, and then we can draw further conclusions and implications that help us in our own life or whatever have you. And then there is the other option, which is that comprehension and interpretation take place in parallel, which I think is the orthodoxy, like anyone who studies relevance theory would tell you, yes, mutual parallel adjustment, everything happens online, no problem there. So we understand the meaning of utterances, including their implicatures and what is said and explicatures and everything, while or as part of evaluating their implications for us. So we draw our own context, and this includes the context that the speaker wants us to get at, and this is how we understand the meaning of utterances. So this happens in tandem. It's not like I need to get to your meaning and then I'm thinking about my own stuff. I'm thinking about my own stuff, and incidentally, you point my attention to the meaning that you want me to get from it. I think I don't need to convince you, but here is a thought experiment of some sort. I've been talking for like 10 minutes now. I'm pretty sure that you can tell that I'm not a native speaker of English. And how would you be able to do that? I think that this is a classic case of inference. You're making this assumption as a probable conclusion around the premises that you have about your knowledge about accents and whatnot. I also guess that because you saw my name, you figured out that I'm not, a native speaker or whatnot because it's a Greek name or whatever have you. The point here is, okay, I invited you to make this inference now. But chances are that many of you, if not most of you, had already made it on your own account. Like I didn't need to invite you in order to get this meaning. Basically, in this case, you have already engaged, if you have had this thought about me, And the same goes for many things, like, the quality of my talk, like the vocabulary I'm using, whatever. I mean, you have all this evaluation of the utterance, let's say, at the same time. You engage in contextual inference even without me intending you to do so. So I may be even trying to masquerade that I'm not a native speaker of English. I might fake an RP accent or whatever have you, but still you can get this information. And I think that this can give us, I think that this can give us an alternative way of looking at how we can actually, or we should actually look at pragmatics if we follow a cognitive account. But let's return to the domain of pragmatics. Again, another quotation by Wilson in 1993. The goal of pragmatic theory is to explain how the hearer recognizes the overtly intended interpretation of an utterance. And I think that, yes, we can, of course, aim at investigating the overtly intended interpretation, and this is what we have been doing as relevance theorists over the past years. I don't think that we can realistically isolate it when talking about spontaneous language use. So I don't think that we may say that what my object of study is how hearers understand what speakers say, but that doesn't mean that this is all that hearers get from a communicative event, right? And since contextual inference transcends speakers' intention, so the point I'm trying to make here is that, okay, we need contextual inference. That's the basis of pragmatics. We don't necessarily need speaker intention. So pragmatic meaning can go, and actually Deirdre had made the point that it has to go in terms of literary interpretation beyond what the speaker originally and overtly intended to communicate to. So here we have a bit of a tension, right? I mean, our object of study is overt communication and whatnot, but at the same time, we can see that a parallel mechanism, I think it's the same mechanism, I don't think we have multiple mechanisms giving us inferred meanings, sort of a parallel mechanism gives us access to other inferences too, that are, again, context-based, but not necessarily intended. Oh, and this brings me to what I think is, like, I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't call it the essence, but I would call it like the reason of being of contextual inference. Now, there is in the literature, and one of the basic criticism of anyone who's working on non-Anglo-American or intention-based or Gricean accounts, that there is a lot, and there is a lot of empirical evidence as well, that in conversation, the meanings of the interactants are operative, co-constituted, jointly negotiated. Basically, they're not stable things. It's not like I'm saying something and you just get my intention. You also include your own thoughts in there. And I think that this essentially, gives even extra evidence to suggest that, yeah, maybe what we're doing is not necessarily comprehending. What we're doing is interpreting, and comprehension is just a byproduct of interpreting. Why though? Why is it? Why does that happen? Why do we interpret on top of comprehending? And what is the reason for it? And I think that, unlike pragmaticists or anyone who has as their object of study how to understand, like how understand overt meaning works, I think that us interactants, people, as they go about their daily lives, do not really aim at understanding each other. Like, I'm talking to you. Obviously, you have to understand me, but what you're trying to get out of my talk is, okay, what do I think about this? Does it make sense to me? And whatever have you. And unless perhaps, and hopefully when they're at school, okay, if someone is at school, the point is to understand what the teacher tells you, right? But in everyday interaction, the point is not really to understand each other. The point is to understand what the other person wants us to do, or how they want to go about, something like this. Oh, and this, I think, messes again very well with Sperber and Wilson's account, because the goal of the interpretation process, as relevance theory sees it, is not to classify the sentence, blah, blah, blah. They have a whole lot of options, but to work out the logical consequences of adding an utterance to a pre-existing stock of beliefs and assumptions to which the hearer has access. And this is basically an ode to cognitive effects, or positive cognitive effects, as they've come to be known now. So if we take as our starting point, and I think that this is the starting point if we take seriously the cognitive principle of relevance, that interactants, or people that communicate, again, I call them interactants because I want to drive a bit away from intention. seek effects that will be useful to their cognitive environments. So they don't necessarily want to understand one another. So basically, when I'm engaged in an efficient communication, I'm giving you a reason to believe that I will give you something that's useful for you. That's what a positive cognitive effect is. So understanding what I'm saying is just your route to get into that, which is the ultimate sort of like goal of the process. What an overt communicative intention does, yes, is give some audience very good reason to expect such effects. And basically it's not even an expectation, it's a presumption, right? It's something that you automatically think of. But this does not mean that in the absence of such an intention, we wouldn't be able to engage in contextual inference proper. And I know that there is a huge discussion, which we had at Brighton some years ago, about whether we can posit like different systems when it comes to pragmatic inference. But I think that it makes more sense to have a single system when it comes to processing information rather than one that's dedicated to ostension, another that's non-dedicated to ostension and only to information transmission. But again, we can discuss this later. So perhaps we can remove the requirement of overt communicative intentions when delineating the domain of linguistic pragmatics. And in other words, pragmatics can handle far weaker notions of verbal communication too. And again, I'm very specific about, I should have included linguistics here, apologies about that. I'm very specific about language because what I want to talk about is language. What I'm talking about is language. And actually, this has been like, I think it's run of the mill now in relevance theory to say that yes, communication does not just involve like the overt communication, but there are so many weaker notions of communication, and relevance theory can shed light into those too. Okay, so I've been talking about communication, and now I want to turn the discussion a bit to language. And I think that, you know, one of the okay, so I'll just be honest with you. Like the main reason in my thoughts when one of the main reasons that I'm trying to come up with an account that sort of consolidates this is that whenever I have tried to make an argument that okay, this is how pragmatics affects linguistic meaning, let's say, you know, there's always the counter argument, yeah, but this is in communication, so language is not communication and whatnot. And I think that we can make the link between communication and language. I think that the link has already been made in the relevance theory literature. So let me start with something that I assume everybody's going to agree with, and especially Tom, thanks for being here. The function of linguistic utterances is and has always been to provide highly precise and informative evidence of the communicator's intention. This implies that language, as we know it, developed as an adaptation in a species that already had inferential communication and therefore was capable of mind reading. In other terms, from a relevance theory point of view, the existence of mind reading is a precondition for the emergence and evolution of language. So one of the main, and this is, I think, one of the major sort of like contributions of relevance theory, not to linguistics or communicative theories or whatnot, but to the study of cognition, right? It makes a very, very important stance about the mind reading being the basis upon which language evolved. And much more recently, Tom Scott Phillips basically argued, and quite convincingly in my view, that the intuitive idea that the linguistic code makes communication possible and that pragmatic factors make it more expressively powerful is not only false, it is exactly upside down. And he goes on, I mean, in his book to provide a number of reasons why language as it has evolved is actually derivative of our ability to engage in inferential communication. Like that's why we have ellipses, that's why we have all these things that make it expressively powerful and whatnot. On this basis, I have like recently published a paper where I'm making a hypothesis. And according to this hypothesis, external languages developed in our species because they present an evolutionary advantage as communicative stimuli. And here I want to distinguish very sharply between external language, the e-language, like language is a natural object that exists out there in the world, like the words we use and the utterances we produce. So not sentences and concepts and propositions and things like that. So if despite the inextricable link of what I'm producing right now, which is speech, to an internal conceptual system, which is what is conceived of as I language traditionally from a Chomsky's perspective, If, despite this link, external language is adapted to specifically fulfill a communicative role, and I think that the case has been made in relevance theory time and again, they may have evolved not just as codes that represent more or less determinate meanings, but rather as vehicles that enable the communication of such meanings over and above the confines of what they can and do encode in the first place. So basically what I've argued in this paper is that, okay, language is a natural object, apart from being a mental capacity. When we take it as a natural object, like the words that we're using, they don't necessarily have to have a one, not only one to have a direct relation with our conceptual system. Essentially, if language evolved in a way that gave it this expressive power, right? And the reason is that, if we have a coded system that is not just like a mimicry of our conceptual system, but rather a coded system that's used for communication, this gives us the evolutionary advantage that gets more expressive power. We can say more with less. We don't need to have a word for everything. We can describe things. We can use ellipses. We can use all this stuff. And I think that this gives us a unique evolutionary advantage. So in this picture, and this basically is, I'm going towards the end of my thought process here. So in this picture, we would have our internal language, which is essentially a system of thought. And I've put a question mark next to conceptual. So it would have some building blocks. I'm not sure whether we can still call this like a concept in the traditional sense, but still, a conceptual. And then it would also have some computational rules, the combinatorial system upon which we can produce speech. And this is non-communicable on its own, obviously, right? We don't have direct access to our thoughts, and like in the sense of paraphrasing them in language and whatever as relevant theory and so on. And then we also have our external language, which enables us to communicate an infinite number of thoughts, and I would include impressions, not just thoughts, because we no longer have to have this propositional thing, by allowing us to produce incomplete but precise enough conceptual blueprints that, once pragmatically enriched, can lead our audience to our intended meaning. So here I'm trying to distinguish between the internal aspect of language, like something that exists in the mind, and what we're actually using as a coded system. And I think that the fact that language is used as evidence for communicative intentions should be taken into a lot into account when thinking about its cognitive makeup. If this is correct, our cognitive system could also be taken to have adapted, and this is the one of the things that I'm trying to pursue in my research, that the cognitive system could also be taken to have adapted to invariably treat linguistic stimuli as carriers of speaker meaning than external variants of abstract mental representations. And I think that generally there is the tendency, even when we speak about labels or concepts or things like that, the point is that a word means a concept. So the word tree means tree with capital letters or whatever that might be, even if it's a perceptual symbol, a simulation, or whatever have you. I think, however, that if external language adapted because of its expressive power, then language on its own should be taken to be ostensive by design rather than become ostensive when we use it ostensibly. And I honestly cannot think of a case where you wouldn't, like, we would see a linguistic stimulus and you wouldn't try and figure out the meaning or whatever. Not try, you wouldn't automatically try and do this. I think that this could justify their postulation as automatic triggers of not just linguistic decoding, but also of the comprehension module or of contextual inference. Let's not get stuck on the detail of whether it is the comprehension module or the interpretation or the inferential module or whatever. And I think that actually relevance theory gives us a lot of backing up for this particular position. First of all, we know that linguistic stimuli preempt our attention. Once we recognize something as language, we cannot but see what it says. And there is a lot of experimental evidence showing us. At the same time, we know from relevance theory, or we know that linguistic decoding yields something, a logical form that is of no cognitive value, like of very little cognitive value. So relevance theory treats like the propositional form So no, sorry, the logical form is an incomplete proposition. So it doesn't have any cognitive substance. It needs to be enriched. And I think that our cognitive system would not have opted to preemptively focus our attention to linguistic stimuli unless it stood to gain from them in all cases. So why would we recognize something as linguistic unless we knew that this was bound to be meaningful for us? The same as ostensive communication, basically. So what I'm trying to do is transpose the role of ostensive communication to language as a coded system, as a natural thing. And how will it gain from the processing of linguistic stimuli and through the production of positive cognitive effects? So my thought here is that perhaps language is as it is elliptical, it has all these properties that it has that make it an incomplete system in comparison to our thought, let's say, specifically because it requires the pragmatic model. It requires contextual inference, not the pragmatic module. Let's not be. So external languages probably developed, according to relevance theory, external languages probably developed in our species because they presented an evolutionary advantage as communicative stimuli. No, sorry, this is the same. Apologies. But if linguistic stimuli trigger the pragmatic module, even when they're not embedded in ostensive act, does this mean that ostension should no longer be taken to orchestrate pragmatic inference? And my answer to this would be probably not. I think that, and this has to do with the evolutionary role of language. With the adaptive role that expressive prolixity has played in the evolution of language. So linguistic stimuli may always trigger the relevance-based comprehension procedure because they have evolved to be invariably treated as ostensive. So they don't need to be used by someone. They don't need to be embedded in an ostensive act. They are on their own ostensive entities, or they are treated by our cognitive system automatically as ostensive entities. And I think that another example of this is think about a fire alarm going off right about now. It will take your attention. You don't necessarily, it could be a car backfiring, right? It could be whatever, but it will draw your attention. The language plays a similar role to this when it comes to automatically activating your meaning-making system and whatnot. So on this basis, I think that we can, in principle, distinguish between ostensive acts and ostensive stimuli. So stimuli that become ostensive when a communicator uses them to engage in a communicative act. So even if I do this now, this is a communicative act. I don't necessarily need to communicate something to it, but I'm trying to communicate by snapping my fingers or whatnot. And then stimuli, like a fire alarm or a high-pitched noise or whatever have you, which is always treated as ostensive because its underlying cognitive function is communicative to begin with. And I think that if language is a medium of communication from an evolutionary perspective, then perhaps it has this property. It just preempts attention because of this. If that is correct, linguistic stimuli would always be ostensive in the latter sense, i.e., they would trigger the same kind of pragmatic processing even when they are not intentionally used to communicate something to someone, because, as I said before, it is by design that they attract, this is attention and focus it on the communicator's intention. So yeah, this is sort of like the sort of crazy scenario that I have in mind. I have a couple of very tentative implications. I almost did not include them, but I thought that might as well. Okay, so I have this nice story to say, and I'm trying to back it up through an evolutionary scenario and whatever have you. What would change if we place contextual inference at center stage? I think that the main way of looking at, I think that, there has been in the past quite a lot of tension about how relevance theory views semantics, like the externalism, fodder, the lot and whatever have you. What happened? Okay, so I think that if we go down that path and we sort of disentangle the code, which is the external language, from the conceptual representational system or whatever you want to call it, we no longer need to have metaphysically stable meanings upon which pragmatic inference operates. We no longer need to have encoded concepts, because all linguistic meaning becomes occasion specific and context dependent. And here I'm alluding to, and I think that this like ties in well with recent developments, like the whole pointers idea, like words are pointers towards conceptual spaces, or the distinction between the linguistic, sorry, the encoded concept and the communicated concept and whatnot. And like even philosophically, I think that like Edward Massery has argued quite substantially about the non-existence of context. So again, it's an alternative way of thinking about the connection between language and thought and how meaning sort of mediate both of them. What remains stable, and for that, I mean, again, this is a very random thought, but I thought it is interesting. I think that we haven't paid enough attention to the notion of natural meaning, which we tend to say it's a semantic content, or it's the literal meaning of a word or a sentence or whatever have you. But how Grice sort of talked about meaning is that an utterer is held to intend to convey what is normally conveyed. And that basically doesn't mean that I can use the word tree to mean something. If everybody uses it to mean something, this could become its stable basis or whatever have you. I know that I'm now like going into very dangerous territory because I'm sort of pushing myself towards inference role semantics and all the problems that comes with this. But I think that it is a viable alternative, and I think that it is something that relevance theory has been playing with and flirting with for quite a while now. And the other thing, I think that this could easily open up the possibility of accounting for what have been called perceptual, affective, blah, 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 effects as products of the inferential processor and parallel with cognitive ones. So we no longer need to have to posit like something, a stable meaning. If context derives everything, context can, apart from giving you an assumption, it can also give you an emotion if you listen to a slur or whatever have you. So there is a way in which we could potentially, again, as I said, thought process, we could potentially account for other types of effects in comparable ways to cognitive effects. Because right now we have all this talk about these other effects, but the link between like, okay, this is information, this is feeling, so I don't know, or emotion, I don't know how to treat this. And I think that if we look at this, then language could have like this dimension included as well, but in this way. So that's all from me. As I said, please be as as critical as you can. Thank you. Let me just bring. I keep looking to the other screen because I would see you there, and now I'm bringing it in front of me.
Thank you, Stavros. It was really interesting. I see lots of hands up and.
No, it's just thank you, everyone.
Does anyone want to start? No?
Okay, I was going to let somebody else go first, but no one is, so maybe I can encourage them. So it's an excellent talk, Stavros, and I mean, you're clearly engaging with fundamental questions, and you won't be surprised that I agree with almost everything you're saying, and I think the direction you're pushing, I don't know if I'd phrase it as context is doing everything, but however one phrases it, that I think that's the right direction to go. I was taking some screenshots while you were talking, and I'm going to take digging one up because I wanted to ask you or press on one particular point. Bear with me while I just bring it up. Yeah. So there's an assumption I've come to realize only over time. There's an assumption, I think, in the classic relevance theory texts about language as a cognitive phenomenon, essentially a Chomskyan kind of assumption. And I think, I mean, I don't know if you want to buy into it, but it seems to me that the natural conclusion, or from the direction you're pushing, is to let go of that assumption.
Yeah.
And there's a line in your slide 13, implications for language. And I was nodding all along until one word, right? If despite you're talking about evolution and humans, they have evolved, languages may have evolved not as codes that fully represent more or less determined meanings. Yeah. Why not? They may have evolved not even as codes that fully represent more or less determinate meanings, but rather as, the
vehicles that, yeah.
regularly that reliably and regularly do the things that they do, as you were getting to with your last couple of slides. So yeah, those are thoughts, and I guess my question is, does your line of argument lead to or encourage or warrant dropping the kind of Chomsky assumptions about the nature of language rather than communication?
I think that, okay, so yes and no. So the yes goes with regards to language as an object of study, like English, Swahili, Maltese, blah, 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 so this type of thing. So there, yes, I think that we need to look at language as something that does something for us, so not as something that represents the world or whatever have you, if we are to go down this path.
I just want to come in with a clarification just on this.
Yeah, sure.
When you said language in that sentence, but just to help me be clear, I think it'd be better if you said languages, right? That's what you're talking about.
Sorry.
Right?
I used language in...
You said language, but you're talking about languages as tools.
I'm talking about languages.
Yeah.
And actually, okay, like fun trivia. When I published this paper where I started this sort of argumentation or whatnot, the original title was The Communicative Function of Natural Languages. And the editor came back and said, yeah, that's not really used, so why don't you make it language? And then we had a whole debate, and then I sort of caved in. No, but I'm with you on this. Like, I think that it isn't languages. Like, I'm not talking about the cognitive capacity for it. I think there is a cognitive capacity for it. I think that its role is purely, I mean, again, musings. I think that it's purely procedural in the sense that it gives you directions for interpretation or whatever have you. And that goes across the board, like both in conceptual terms and to a certain extent syntax as well. And that it has to do with fossilized use, let's say, or some sort of inference role. Again, I cannot really give you a very, but I think, yes, we need to abandon...
Sorry, I'm going to come in again. I don't know if you attended the talk. I don't know, one of the recent relevance researchers talks by Nick Allott, arguing in favor that we still need some notion of literal meaning within, and I think he's pointing in a very similar direction to what you're saying right now.
I know. It's a completely, yeah, I mean, that is a completely different point. Yeah. I mean...
No, I'm not sure it is a different, I think it's the same point as the one you're making.
Okay. I'll look it up. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but I will look it up. I mean, these are posted online, right? So I can.
He has a paper as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know that the texter and Allott and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, we need something stable. I don't think that this stable thing matches what we think of in metaphysical Fodorian semantic terms or whatnot. I think that what is stable is something that is use-based and it's stable enough. It doesn't need to match perfectly or whatever. When it comes to the notion of... So I told you the no. Like, yes, I think we need to do away with Chomsky. When it comes to the yes... Okay, I'm going to turn a bit fodder to you, but what I think that we have is this innate ability to acquire a system like this. So it's like the same thing, like we don't have atomic concepts that are innate, so language is not an innate thing, but we have an innate ability to develop a system that does this. But the this is different from what Chomsky assumes. Or not Chomsky. Chomsky actually is quite okay with pragmatics. The this is different from what we have traditionally thought of as semantic content or whatever have you.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah. If there aren't any, I'm going to have a follow-up unless I'm stopped by the chair. No.
Thank you.
I'm not being stopped, so I'm gonna follow that last point. So the this that you're talking about, I mean, I actually agree with you that, well, maybe it's possible, but there might, humans do acquire languages early in life without effort, etc., etc. Now, this could be, if you're more, I suppose, Fodorian or Chomskyan about it, something about combinatorics and so on. But this could also be, if you're Adele Goldberg, it could be a memory for constructions, right? Just a very large, an ability to store a very large number of micro conventions for doing ostensive communication in the way you're talking about. Do you have any particular views on what, you kept using the Dijkstra's way?
I have a preference. I don't have a view. I have a preference, but I tend to go with the latter. Yeah, I mean, actually, even from my PhD days, I recall this very vividly. But then, my supervisors were like, "No, you're going really
Remind me,
K-wire.
so what did you call it in the then?
It was construction grammar. It was specifically Goldberg's view of construction
Oh,
grammar back in
okay.
2000 or whatnot.
Yeah.
So I was doing, okay, so I was working a bit with dynamic syntax too and whatnot. And, I had my problem with dynamic syntax is that they don't have anything that's stable enough. Like you need to have some fossilized knowledge. You need to know that, that it needs to be a subject, right? And I think that this is I think that this is, yeah, something that you essentially learn because you hear all the time and it sort of sticks to you. So it's a memory, as you would put it. That's my preference. Now I don't, and I think that generally, if we are to explain language within this context, which is a communicative, like why would language exist unless we used it to talk now? Like if we are to think of language like that, then what's the point of like the syntax like exists precisely because it carries this procedural meaning that tells you combine this and think of this as the actor or whatever have you. I mean, that's my.
So I kept nodding, but then at the end, you trigger me again because if you want to embrace, if you want to entertain let's say the radical position, which would be to take Goldberg's version of construction grammar and to pair it with relevance, then you wouldn't talk about procedural. I forgot the expression you used at the end. Did you say procedural meaning?
I said that it's there. I mean, I think of this. No, okay, then also, okay. So what you're positing is that because I keep thinking of grammar. Again, you're right. I mean, I keep having this conceptual procedural thing, like something is meaningful, the other thing is computational.
Yeah. If you're Goldberg,
you're right. Yes, you're right. In that sense, you are. Yeah. In that sense, you're right. But I need to also fight my own preconceptions that But my understanding, yes, is precisely what you're positing, that the structures themselves are something that we use on cue to provide meanings.
Yeah.
So I don't, again, there is a lot of more thought that needs to go through there, but I think, that's the direction I'm hoping for.
Okay, great. I should let go of the floor now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Caroline, hi.
Caroline.
Hi, Stavros.
Hi,
Thank
how are
you.
you?
And it's really nice to hear this talk. I remember the Brighton one very well. And I don't know if I've just moved in my thinking or if your argument is more clear or concise, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I feel like I'm going to bring down the tone to something slightly more concrete. So apologies, but something I thought it might be interesting to mention that we have some really interesting evidence from clinical data that I think resonates with this sort of fundamental thing that you're suggesting, that linguistic stimuli are always treated as ostensive. So I've done a little bit of work using a relevance theory lens to look at conversation data involving people who use alternative and augmentative communication systems. So people who are not using verbal language, but are pointing at low or high-tech devices which have images and words printed above them. So one example, now there's several, and we've published a chapter and a paper on some of these examples. But one of them, this little boy is shown a picture. He's shown a picture of a man who is trying to brush his minimal amount of hair with a toothbrush. And he then needs to use his communication device to communicate this, like a barrier task to his communication partner. So his communication partner has not seen this picture. Now, his communication is constrained, obviously, much more than a typical speaker by what pictures and items are in his device. So he does something particularly creative in my mind, and he finds an item that has a picture of a man with a single wispy piece of hair.
Oh, wow, okay.
And he pushes it. It's the only time in the conversation where he identifies the picture, but he doesn't use the verbal output. So in other words, the communicator sees the picture that he's identifying, but doesn't hear the spoken output.
Okay.
But the word above the picture is before, because it's meant to show before the hair is brushed. So if you're following me, what the communication partner now has is a picture of a person with messy hair, a balding person with messy hair.
Okay.
and no auditory output, in contrast to the whole rest of the conversation. Okay, so there's this ostensive silence, in my opinion. There's this pointing, the picture is what's important. And in all of the cases where we see this kind of creative use of a picture, but there's a linguistic item attached to it, the communication partner cannot get past the linguistic item. So the communication partner gets stuck on the linguistic stimuli of the meaning of before, completely derailed from the creative use of this picture to communicate a concept, and is completely constrained by this idea of before.
Oh, wow.
And I just think it's a really interesting example of how this linguistic stimuli derails any other contextual inference that the partner could make, despite multiple attempts of the person.
My also feeling is that it preempts attention. I mean, I don't know whether it's more important than, I don't know, fire alarm or whatnot, but it does. Like, it has something
Well,
special.
it does something specific, and we haven't written about it in the same way as you. I don't think we've used the phrasing that linguistic stimuli is always treated as ostensive, but phrasing that it is being prioritized in some way by the communication partner.
Which paper is that? So
I can send you the links. One of them is a chapter, so I would have to send you a scanned copy, and then one of them is a paper. And I know Deirdre and I have had discussions about whether it's appropriate to say that this is being prioritized in the meaning-making process. And I'm leaning towards this idea of it being treated as specifically ostensive, because it's being taken as more meaningful than other stimuli that the person is giving, right? So anyway, I just wanted to say, I think there's some interesting conversational evidence for this from relevance theory lens.
I mean, if you don't send it, I'll probably email you soon to ask you for it.
I'll hunt down the photocopy of the chapter, but I'll find the paper for you as well.
Thank you so much. Yes. No, this is. And again, there is a lot. I mean, I think I've also investigated, but again, I haven't done like the proper like literature review or whatnot. But there is a lot of evidence like that there is a perceptual difference as well when it comes to language, like that a reaction to language, sort of like this, our time reaction to language or whatever have you, like it sort of stands out.
Yeah, and we're seeing this repeated in similar scenarios with the data set. So it's not just this particular person. I've just described that one in detail, but we're seeing the same pattern repeated, and it's quite robust data because it's video data, it's timed because it's a device, so we can see how long the person is speaking on these things. So it's interesting. So thank you. It was a really useful.
Thank you. Yeah, very, very useful. So I'll definitely quote you on this. Right. So
Valandis is there with hands up.
Yeah. Stavros, I did my homework and I read your paper before showing up here.
Oh, cool.
That's your 2022 paper. And I think it all, connects to everything you said. I have a couple of questions because I want to make sure that everything is clear in my head. And I think the best way to do this is by way of, exemplification. So suppose, for example, that you overhear a conversation. Okay, you overhear a conversation. It's someone else, two people are talking, you don't know them, you overhear a conversation. Now, these are linguistic stimuli, let's say, so they're utterances, right?
Yes.
So I think you said, or you would like to say that these are a case of ostension.
Yeah, no. I would say no. Overhearing is not the case of ostension. The language itself triggers the processor. So the language is the ostensive thing. So instead of looking at it as an act, like as me taking your attention, whenever language is there, it's like hearing a fire alarm, but in less, let's say, emergency senses.
Right. So these are not cases of ostension, then they're not ostensive stimuli, then these utterances that you overhear, right?
No. The language, there is the difference between the ostensive act, like me doing something and drawing your attention, and something that draws your attention just by existing. So
yes,
I mean, an example that we've debated quite substantially.
Anyways,
Finding someone's diary, let's say, right? It's not an offensive act. They're just writing down their thoughts. They don't want to publish it, or I don't know, it's just, random scribblings. You still make sense of it. So I think that it's the language that drives that tells you, okay, there's meaning here. And then obviously it's up to you whether you're going to, to engage with it more or not.
So there is pragmatic enrichment here?
Yes, there needs to be. I mean, I don't think that, can you, think about it, you find your partner's, let's say, I don't know, diary. I mean, and you read it, can you understand unless you pragmatically enrich? That's impossible, no? That would be impossible. How would you, if you find a piece of paper that somebody wrote, but you know for a fact that they didn't intend to communicate something to you or anyone, and you're trying to interpret it, or think about making sense of things that look like language. Let's say that you see a graffiti, which is just a scribble, and you instinctively take it to be. I mean, I don't want to go to these really weird cases or scenario that can occur, but I think that overhearing, it triggers the processor, and then obviously because this is an automatic process, it doesn't give you the guarantee that you're going to get fantastic cognitive effects. But if you overhear someone and they're talking about you, then obviously you're going to pay more attention because the goal sort of reaches that. So you disengage from the process easier than in complete case of ostensive communication. And again, I think that there is a level there to a certain extent. Think about
the thing is, if you don't want to disengage, how successful is the pragmatic enrichment going to be if you can't even saturate the sentence? I mean, it's difficult to even assign reference. So I don't know exactly how pragmatic enrichment is going to be. I mean, what kind of pragmatic enrichment this is going to be? That's what's confusing me, basically.
Okay, so you mean let's say, okay, I'm overhearing someone and they say I'm ready.
Yes.
And I don't know what they're ready for.
Exactly.
Do I need to know what they're ready for?
If you want to make sense of it.
What I'm saying, if I want to, but the thing is, again, are we trying to look for a full-blown, complete propositional meaning that, I'm ready to go to the dance and get ready or whatever? Or is it I'm getting a cue and then I'm sort of building up an interpretation? And if it doesn't interest me, I'm still working out the meaning because I'm trying to reach cognitive effects. I see I don't have cognitive effects. I just disengage. Because the usual example that people have given me is okay, think about being on an experiment and looking like word, non-word. It's still language. It doesn't do anything for you, right? But still, I think that essentially the system engages and disengages because you know that this is useless. You have a specific task in mind to do. But that doesn't mean that attention is not, automatically activated. Yeah, that's the processor, not attention. Yeah. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, you definitely did. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have Agnieszka hand up, maybe briefly because we're coming to the end.
Yes.
Yeah, just a very brief comment. There's been attempts to combine relevance theory with various sociological frameworks, not always very successful. But I'm thinking about government participation in which what
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I didn't get that. You're breaking up, so I didn't get that last bit. You're thinking about
developers, including Levinson, and there, the ostension comes in different versions and in different guises, depending on whether the hearer is the addressee or the third party. There are ratified and non-ratified hearers, and so on. I'm not of thinking relevance theoretic notion of ostension and intention, and to whom this intention is oriented, in combination with this participation framework and the idea that there are different hearer roles.
I'm not sure if it makes sense, but okay.
No, it does. I mean, I
okay.
will have to look it up, to be honest. I would really have to look it up. But thank you very much. I mean, I think I got what you were saying. I hope it's okay if I get in touch over email because you were breaking up at some point. But
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
no, but I definitely think there is this whole, and the reason, like I alluded a bit to the sociocultural pragmatic literature and this co-constitution of meaning and whatnot, is that they have a much more, how do I put it, nuanced view on intentions, which can get like really weird. But it's not just the thing that you have or don't have. Like there are multiple types of intentions. There are stronger and less and weaker intentions and whatnot. And I think that we have been looking at this a bit monolithically from the tradition of Grice, let's say, that there is one intention and that's it. And now we're facing the problems of this when we're talking about weak communication and literature and art and this sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, okay, that's yeah. Thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Okay, so thank you so much for the Stavros and for the people who commented. It was really interesting, and I think you're gonna have to come back and
sure.
you have
Why
a
not?
stage of your this research so that we can discuss again and hopefully we'll have another engaging talk. Now, can I pass on to Kate, who can explain what we're doing next month? That's quite exciting.
Sure.
Yeah, so sorry, I've got a screen and a camera on different things. So we're doing something slightly different next month. So it's the 28th of February is our meeting next month. And what we thought we would do is invite a range of postgraduate students, PhD students, and early career researchers to give short talks. So we have 3 lined up for next session, so 28th of February. So Rongu Wang from Dublin City, Chiara Valaki from Brighton, and Mariana Varuvraka from NKUA. So they're all PhD students who are working with relevance theory in their theses. And we just wanted to kind of have a session that supported, you know, the future of relevance researchers. So please do come along to that. We'll send details around nearer the time, but please come along and support the next generation, as it were, if you are able. They'll all be giving kind of short 10 to 15-minute talks. So that's our plan for February. It's on our website, so you can check out the details there as well.
Right, thanks, Kate, and hold on, still recording.